Hi everyone, I'm Sam.
I'm Jesse.
And we're going to be doing a faction focus video today. I've written a series of these faction focus articles for Goonhammer.com, which are trying to give a picture of the different Malifaux factions, how they play, the lore behind them, and especially the masters. These are supposed to be for people who are maybe interested in Malifaux, but haven't really taken the plunge yet to get a sense of what the game's like. But it's also for players who are experienced and maybe looking to branch out to a new faction. Mm-hmm. Or players who even play a faction and they're interested in our take on the masters and,
definitely.
The characters in them. So I hope for everybody there's something in these videos for you to enjoy. We're going to be starting with our look at the guild.
Yeah, we will.
So the guild in Malifaux is law and order. Now, they are the ones in charge. They colonized Malifaux after the breach opened, and they are the ones that mine the soul stones and bring them back through the breach. The guild rules from the guild enclave in the heart of Malifaux City. And from there, they send out their patrols, their guards, their various different groups that serve them to maintain order. So while the guild are not necessarily good guys, they are at least the people who are interested in keeping order and pushing out the monsters. So the guild masters mostly tend to be some form of lawman, a bounty hunter or something like that. But they're, even with that restriction, they're pretty diverse and unique and have a variety of different play styles.
Yeah, they definitely have an overarching theme of being in positions of authority. And you'll probably see that played out in really their play styles across the entire faction.
So our first guild master that we're looking at is Charles Hoffman.
Good old Hoffman.
So Hoffman is a dual faction master who's part guild and part Arcanists. He came to Malifaux originally with his older brother, Ryle Hoffman, who was a brilliant inventor. Unfortunately, as they passed through the breach, there was a flare of etheric energy, and Ryle was struck down, crippled and badly hurt and dying. But Charles, who was always a bit smaller, weaker, and unfortunately afflicted by polio, was given this amazing magical power to control machines. And the guild put him in charge of their amalgamation division, which is the division that goes after people who are amalgamating constructs and flesh in forbidden ways. But Hoffman also works with Victor Ramos, the head of the Arcanists, who is a great inventor of constructs. And so with his loyalty split between these two factions, one thing he has in common in both is robots.
Yes, giant, stompy robots.
So Hoffman's keyword is called augmented, and it mostly consists of things he's built.
Yeah. So one of the overarching themes across this entire keyword is their utilization of a resource called power tokens. In Hoffman's original title, he does a great job at putting power tokens on his friendly models for them to use as a resource to either get plus flips or to get built-in suits on all their actions. Now, for anybody who's played any amount of Malifaux, you realize how important getting specific suits are to either hit target numbers or to get specific triggers that you need in a given situation. And the inability of the majority of the models in the game to guarantee those suits is a big deal. Hoffman's entire crew gets around that, and they're guaranteed to get the suit that they need every single time that they take one of these actions, as long as they have a power token in reserve.
So they're very strong, they're very durable because they're robots and they're made of metal, so they're armored, and Hoffman can repair them.
He sure can.
But Hoffman's title version is a little bit less about buffing his crew and a bit more about mad science.
Yes.
Charles Hoffman, inventor, creates these pylon markers, like big Tesla coils on the table, and he can hand out power tokens when models are near them, but he can also just use the markers themselves to block off lanes so enemies can't move through them, and he can channel lightning through them with his very powerful alternating current attack. Shoots lightning.
Yeah, alternating current is it can only target the same model once per activation, and it deals one irreducible damage, and then it gets an additional +1 damage per pylon marker that's within 6 inches of Hoffman himself. So if he builds a kind of a bunker of pylon markers around himself, he can do up to a maximum of 4 irreducible damage with no variable flip, which is pretty impressive.
And he can do it 3 times per activation to 3 different targets. That's a lot of irreducible damage.
Yeah, definitely.
So Hoffman, in either of his incarnations, is very dangerous, and if you're playing against him, you really need to be prepared for these big, clanky robots.
Yes, definitely.
That's Hoffman.
That's Hoffman.
So our next master is Daschle Barker.
Yes.
Daschle Barker is kind of like, if you really like Discworld and you like Sam Vimes, but you wish he was a lot more psychotically violent, then you can play Daschle. He's the captain of the Guild Guard, which is their mainline police force. And Daschle is kind of unique for the Guild in that mostly he's just there to call for help.
He sure is. He is the guild's summoning master, which in previous iterations of the game, guild didn't have. So he's a new addition to their lineup.
And also, Daschle's been around for a while, but
He has.
he's kind of the influence of the different editions really shows in Daschle, because he used to be just a lowly guild sergeant.
Sure did.
In second edition, he was promoted and he was a henchman for Lucius, and now he's a master all of his own as he's been promoted to lead the guard.
And as an aside, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Malifaux in general is it's a game system that is not afraid to advance its storyline and actually change or even remove models based on the changes in the overall story. Something I really appreciate.
For example, Ryle Hoffman, who we mentioned when we were talking about Charles, used to be a model. He's not anymore. Charles has laid him to rest.
He sure has.
As for Daschle, though, Daschle's really cool. As a summoner, he can bring on ordinary little guild guard. He can bring on mounted patrols on the back of horses, guild riflemen, and even big executioners with heavy claws. So he can really call for the kind of help that he needs in any given moment.
Yeah, definitely. And his crew can actually utilize corpse markers as a resource, which is something that you'd think seems a little strange for a bunch of guards, but they can use them for great effect.
Yeah, and especially when you get to his title version. If you need some corpse markers, Daschle Barker's title, the Butcher, is often called Bashel.
Yes.
For good reason. He is brutal.
Daschle has turned in his previous weapons for a pair of mean axes. And he has changed from a summoning master to one that you want right in the front lines, dealing damage with a very impressive set of melee abilities.
In addition to his attack, which is brutal enough on its own, he has the ability Second Slice, which deals damage to everyone nearby. And then if there's any enemy models left on 1 damage, it finishes them off.
Sure does.
Really savage.
Yeah, it's a great way to get around crews that have a lot of hard to kill, which is pretty brutal.
He can also allow any nearby guard to use soul stones, which makes them remarkably durable and able to force through their triggers in a pinch.
Yeah, definitely. So Daschle Barker and the Butcher and the original version is a great example of a master that plays completely differently from one title version to the other, and I really like that.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get when your opponent declares Daschle. Now we're going to talk about one of the most iconic masters in the setting. Yeah. If you've seen any Malifaux media, pictures, whatever, you've seen Lady Justice.
Yep. Fiery-haired lady with a blindfold and a gigantic sword, putting the hurt onto every undead model on your opponent's side.
Yeah, Lady Justice leads the Marshal Division, the Death Marshals, whose whole job is to fight against the undead. Now, that doesn't mean she's only good at fighting the undead. She gets certain bonuses if the enemy is undead, but she can also cause enemies to count as undead with some of the models in her crew, which let her use those abilities. But mostly what Lady Justice does is flip out and kill people.
She sure does. She's a master with a leap, which really helps her get up the table, and her damage track on her attack is a whopping 3, 4, 5. And anytime she takes that attack without making a charge action to generate it, she gets a positive flip on the damage, which is pretty disgusting.
She's very dangerous. Yeah. If you get her into the middle of your crew, you are going to regret it. Pretty straightforward, and I think a very good starting master.
Yeah, definitely.
In fact, Doug from this channel, Lady Justice was his first master. And I think he still has kind of a soft spot for her, because when Lady Justice gets into the middle of your crew, she just kills things.
She sure does.
Now, her title version, Lady Justice Death Touched, actually different in a really interesting way. She's a little bit less personally brutal, but she's managed to pull out a pinewood coffin, which the rest of her crew already had.
Yeah, so she can actually use that coffin, just like the Death Marshals in her crew, to bury enemy models. And she's actually gained the ability to attack buried models, either ones that she and her crew have buried themselves, or some crews actually bury their models for benefit. She puts the kibosh on that.
You definitely don't want to bury your own guys when Lady Justice is around.
No, definitely not.
She's also able to drop these pine box markers on the board, these coffin markers, which clutter up the lanes and make it very difficult for your opponent to do anything. So in general, she's traded a little bit more of her straightforward play for this very powerful controlling aspect, which I think is kind of cool and unique.
Yeah, but her melee attack is still no slouch. At a stat 7 and a respectable 2, 4, 5 damage track, potentially ignoring hard to kill, hard to wound, and demise, she can really put out some damage when she needs to.
She absolutely can. That's Lady Justice.
Sure is.
Next, we're going to talk about Lucius. He's the first dual faction master we're going to cover.
Yeah, he is, definitely. He actually shares faction in the Guild and the Neverborn.
Yes, very unusual. The Law and Order Guild and the monstrous Neverborn. Lucius Matheson is the Governor General's secretary, and he wears a mask all the time. which is pretty good for him because whatever's behind that mask is definitely not a human face.
Definitely not.
No one's quite sure what Lucius is. He's an infiltrator, but he leads the elite division on the guild side, which consists of lawyers and investigators, people who basically come in to do cover-ups when the ordinary people of Malifaux shouldn't have their minds troubled by some dreadful dark news. But on the Neverborn side, he leads the mimics, Neverborn, that are really good at imitating humans and taking their forms. So Lucius's loyalties are pretty divided, and nobody really trusts him.
Yeah.
Not his allies on either side of the faction divide.
Yeah, Lucius is the consummate schemer, and his loyalties really only fall to himself.
Oh, yes. Now, Lucius on the table is, as you might expect, kind of a controlling master who likes to, rather than get in there and get his hands dirty himself, lead his crew to do various things and move them around, control your opponent's actions. He, in many ways, can amplify your own crew's abilities in indirect fashion.
Right. He's really focusing on putting his own models into position to have the greatest effect. And unlike a lot of other masters that control and give, trade AP to other models in their crew, his crew can actually generate resources in the form of cards while they're taking out of activation actions. So a lot of the problem with those types of crews is the resource drain that it puts on you. Lucius kind of gets around that to a degree.
He really does.
Yeah.
But of course, his title version, he's decided all this mucking around is a waste of time, and he's going to do it himself.
Yep, gloves off, and he's taking matters into his own hands. We
His
have
own
Lucius,
dagger-like claw.
His own dagger-like claw, yeah. We have Lucius Matheson, dishonorable. He has traded in his scheming ways for those of a straight-up assassin.
He can jump around the board, teleporting from place to place, and just gutting people with that claw.
Yep, that with a not really striking 2-3-5 damage track. However, it also gives if the target has staggered, which he can give out with one of his own abilities with no resist, then you actually end up getting a positive flip on the damage, and he does have critical strike, so that not very impressive 2-3-5 damage track can actually go up to a 4-5-7.
Very nasty.
And you're pretty much always going to be able to cheat a card on the damage for that. So his ability to spike damage at the cost of some significant resources is nothing to be trifled with.
He's also got still some ability to make his crew do things. He can issue them orders, and he can also move enemies around. And when he moves an enemy into melee range of a friendly model, that friendly model can stab him right away.
Sure can.
So he's got some of the play aspects of the original Lucius maintained, but Lucius's title is much more direct and brutal.
Yes,
and I think that's a lot of fun for people.
Absolutely.
That's Lucius.
That's Lucius.
The next master we're going to be talking about is Nellie Cochran. As an aside, Elizabeth Cochran was a pioneering female journalist who wrote under the name Nellie Bly.
Yeah.
And now you know.
Now you know.
So,
Malifaux is filled with all sorts of culture references, just like that.
And they're usually about that subtle, like Nellie's henchwoman Fiona Gage, who's based on Phineas Gage in pretty much every way.
Yeah.
So Nellie is the editor-in-chief of the Malifaux Tattler, which is kind of a tabloid and propaganda rag for the guild. So her journalistic ethics maybe leave a little bit to be desired, but she does have a genuine desire to write an exciting story and get the people fired up. And that's really reflected in how she plays on the table.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. The way that she works is she actually controls and benefits from your opponent taking the interact action. If they take her and a number of other models that have the exclusive interview ability on the front of their card, if an enemy model takes an interact action within a 2-inch range of one of those models, you actually get to control the effect of that interact, effectively preventing your opponent from accomplishing anything with one of those actions.
Oh, absolutely. And she has a lot of ability to distract enemies, stun them. She's really not so good at killing people directly, although she can do some surprising damage.
Yep.
But mostly she's about debuffing them, moving them around, and making it impossible for them to score the schemes or strategy that they've picked.
Yeah, if you pick Nellie into the right scheme and strategy pool, it's very difficult for your opponent to do anything about. And then if your opponent does manage to get some interacts off, drop scheme markers, or do whatever else they need to do, within a whopping 8-inch range, Nellie gets to draw a card and gain the focus or gain focused one, which is pretty nasty.
Yeah, it makes her very effective. And her title version has gone through some changes.
A few. Yeah.
Nellie is very curious, and so when she found a copy of the Flamme, which is the settings equivalent to the Necronomicon, she couldn't help herself from reading it.
No.
The
and she
results,
paid the price.
The results were not great. Nellie's Voice of Disorder version, her title, has gone mad. And this madness is reflected with the distracted condition, which she can basically hand out like candy. Not just to enemies, too. She can hand out the condition to friendly models as well and can benefit from it.
Yep, she and a few other models in her keyword can actually use that distracted ability as a resource, or if the distracted ability is on an enemy model, they can use it to enhance the effect of their own actions.
Yes, they're very good against distracted enemies. She also has some ability to spread conditions around and deal damage when enemies interact, and the ability to control their interactions with the Lessons of Ephraim Wade ability. It's a shockwave where if it damages the enemy, they cannot interact for the rest of the turn unless that interaction is controlled by a friendly model. So it's very dangerous. She's still not the most damage-dealing model in the game, but she's very good at controlling and debuffing the enemy in both of her incarnations.
Yes, definitely.
That's Nellie.
That's Nellie.
Next up is another one of the very first masters from the original first edition of Malifaux, Perdita Ortega. Now, Perdita's crew is a bit unique. They're not her followers or her minions or her hirelings. They're her family.
Yep.
Perdita was sent over by her family to try to earn her fortune in Malifaux, and she turned out to be an incredibly talented Neverborn hunter. And so one by one, she brought the Ortega clan over to join her, and they've set up a big ranch outside of the Malifaux city, which is their home base, from which they recruit hunters and go off on missions to destroy the Neverborn that are harassing and murdering Malifaux citizens.
Yeah. There's some interesting, maybe not clearly stated background with her and her lineage that casts into question what her actual connection to the Neverborn are.
Yes, it's very interesting. Yeah. Perdita herself is obviously a pistolier without compare, but her whole family tends to shoot very effectively.
Yep.
Some of them can fight in melee as well, but mostly when you're taking her, you're building an impressive gun line, and you're also building a crew that supports each other very effectively. They have the ability to take actions during each other's activations, and they also have the ability to hand out quite a lot of focus, which is important.
They sure do.
So they get those severe damage, 5 damage hits.
Yep, they have a lot of damage tracks in the keyword at 2, 4, 5, so the 2 damage is not very threatening, but if you jump up to that moderate or severe, the math changes quite a bit. And with many models in her keyword having access to the critical strike trigger, all of a sudden, even those min 2 hits, if they have the right suits, can be very threatening.
Absolutely. Now, Perdita's title version, Perdita Neverborn Hunter, it shows a way that she can take a keyword that, in many people's opinion, was kind of lacking and really kick it up a notch. Perdita Neverborn Hunter is a little bit less deadly personally, but she buffs her crew substantially by adding a lot of shielded and a lot of card draw to a crew that is really tight on resources.
Very strapped for resources,
the amount of card draw she gives is really significant.
It is.
She also has the unique ability to hire, or to summon rather, a new Pistolero de Latigo, which is not a very strong minion. But when she summons it, she can summon it with a specialty upgrade, which gives them an aura that specifically is aimed at counteracting certain things your enemy is doing. For example, one of the upgrades makes it so that models nearby cannot be forced to take actions outside of their activation, which is something Neverborn like to do to you.
Exactly.
Also, when one of these Pistoleros kills an enemy model, it can upgrade to a monster hunter, and those things are actually pretty tough.
Yeah, and especially a monster hunter that has the benefit of one of those attached upgrades can really get some serious work done.
So Perdita Neverborn Hunter is considered very strong, very competitive, and also just really fun to play.
Yeah,
Getting to play the Ortegas and bouncing actions between each other, focusing and taking those big shots, I think it's a lot of fun. But if you're playing her or playing against her, you definitely want to make sure the table's got lots of terrain on it.
Yeah, for sure. She, the first time that I gave this particular version of Perdita a play, I could see why people were so enamored of her. She's a lot of fun to play and very, very powerful.
And that's Perdita.
That's Perdita.
The last master for the guild that we're going to be talking about is Sonia Creed. Sonia is the head of the Witch Hunter Division, which is the aspect of the guild's law enforcement apparatus that targets underground magic users. She's all about hunting down witches, capturing them, and bringing them back to the Yellow Crypt. And when you get a witch, what do you do with them?
Burn their brains out and turn their magic against them.
You burn them. Absolutely correct. Witches that have been burned through the Yellow Crypt have, as Jesse said, had their magic turned against them and have become witchlings, these little twisted creatures with anti-magic abilities. So Sonia is very, very strong against enemies that are relying on soul stones and triggers and all kinds of special tricks, but she's also just really good at lighting things on fire.
She sure is.
And once she's got that fire out there, she can suppress enemies' powers with it, reducing the range of their abilities and ignoring concealment and cover when targeting them. Once the enemy is on fire, their days are numbered.
Yeah, absolutely. And the crew that she brings to bear has some pretty unique benefits. To Sam's point, most of the models in the crew have counterspell, which make it very difficult for your opponent to use any triggers against them and drains their resources very, very quickly. She can also bring the Witchling Stalkers and Witchling Thralls to play, and Witchling Thralls are no joke. You do not want to see one of those things bearing down on your crew.
Yeah, they do a lot of damage.
Whole lot of damage.
Sonia's title is very interesting. Sonia Creed Unmasked. So Sonia Creed had, for a while, she was wearing this iron mask to restrain the essence of the tyrant Charuf, which had sort of bonded itself to her. But with the ascension of the Burning Man, Charuf has been yanked out of her soul, and she's free again and no longer has to wear the mask. So Sonia Unmasked is much less about countering what your opponent is doing and much more about just turning them into a charred stump. She causes enormous amounts of pyre markers to spring up everywhere on the table.
Yep.
And once they're there, your opponent can't ignore them, and it has to treat them as severe terrain. So it's very difficult for them to maneuver around with all these pyres everywhere.
She can also use burning on herself and other friendly models for benefit to gain positive flips to duels. And if she happens to kill an enemy model that already has a certain amount of burning on them, 2 or greater, she can actually gain a soul stone.
That's not very much burning.
That's not very much
2
burning.
is not
She
a
can
lot.
get that with really pretty much 1 AP.
Yeah.
So she's got a pretty steady stream of fresh soul stones coming into her cache.
So Sonia Unmasked is definitely able to buff her crew a bit more than the original, although she's still very deadly at range. But both versions are pretty straightforward in how they play. They set the whole enemy crew on fire, and then pretty soon they're dead.
Yep.
But she's a really good master, I think, if you're starting the game, especially if you are the kind of person who really likes printing out markers on your 3D printer, because you're going to need a lot.
You're going to need a lot of those, for sure. And she's relatively straightforward, to your point. So she's definitely one of the better choices for a starter master in this keyword or faction.
And that's Sonia.
Yes, that's Sonia.
So that was the guild, huh?
Sure was.
The guild is a great faction. There's, I'd say compared to some of the other factions, they're a bit more cohesive in terms of their lore and their appearance, but it means it presents a very strong theme. So especially if you're the kind of person who likes to paint a big collection and have them all kind of look similar to each other, the guild is really a good pick for that.
Yeah, definitely. And there are a few exceptions to that. Once you start branching out into like Lucius's crew, you can get some very unusual themed models and some of his lawyers that just look a little off or a little weird. And of course, if you like robots, I mean, you can't go wrong with Hoffman.
Oh, yeah. There's also another guild master we haven't covered, Cornelius Bass. We'll be coming back to him when we do the Explorer Society. But you should just bear in mind, he's a dual faction master. You can run him in guild, and if you do, give him a lead-lined coat. He will thank you.
He will thank you for it, for sure.
So that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. There's an article that accompanies this video that you can find on Goonhammer.com, and there's a link down in the description. You can also find a link to our Discord in the description, the Danger Planet Discord, where we discuss Malifaux and all the other games that we play. And finally, you can find a link down there to Jesse's podcast, Boring Conversation, which I would strongly urge you to check out. It's a great podcast, really knowledgeable, really insightful, and it's good for both new players and people who have been playing Malifaux a while. I think everyone's going to get something out of it.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot for coming on, Jesse.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, sure. Yeah. We can talk some more.
Balancing some more. We're going to be totally
definitely.
balanced. I'm going to fall off the balance beam and stop
Don't
being
fall off the
balanced.
balance beam.
I might.
That would, you roll an ankle or something, it'd be really bad.
It would not be great.